This is a absolutely fascinating topic on which Tony Joseph has written an outstanding book on. It's a very challenging topic. It's about who we are literally as Indians, as human beings. I mean, what is really this origin story of us? And it's really fascinating because Tony himself is not a scientist. But what he has done is actually bring together all the scientific knowledge that we have, much of which, believe it or not, came into existence literally in the last 5 years. So this is absolutely cutting edge stuff about Indian, global, human ancestry. Tony Joseph, I'm not going to introduce him because there's a whole paragraph out here already, but distinguished personality in media. He's also been writing on this for a long time, and this book is in a way a culmination. This book called Early Indians, which I'm sure there are a lot of jokes on this already because Early Indians is a sort of a misnomer, but Early Indians has now it's not only doing very well, but it's really it's opening out new ideas as well in this fascinating field of people who came to the Indian subcontinent before 2,000 years or so. All right. So my first question to you, Tony, is how do you get into this field?
Okay. Is it on? Yeah. Thank you very much, Chinmay. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with you because, as you know, Chinmay his book is also focused on migrations. So both of us, in that sense, are focused on migrations, but at different points of time. I got into this topic. The work on this started essentially as a much more limited project, which was essentially only to look at who the Harappans were, because the Harappan civilization is something that has, that has captured my imagination ever since we all read about it in school, and I have always followed it up whenever new research and new findings came up about it. But it always struck me that there were three questions about the Harappan civilization that were never very clear. Who were the Harappans? Where did they disappear? And why did it take more than 1,000 years, once their civilization declined, for cities to rise up in India again? And it also was striking that we read about the Harappan civilization just without feeling a real connect to it. We read about it as much as we would read about the Mesopotamian civilization or the Egyptian civilization, because there's really no cultural connect to it, which put emphasis again on the question, who were they, where did they go? So when I started on this book 6 to 7 years ago now, and the idea was merely to look across disciplines and see whether these questions can be answered in much more closely than they have so far been. So I went to all the Harappan sites, the Dholavira and Gujarat, Dholavira and Northern Gujarat, and met all the scientists, archaeologists, linguists, philologists, epigraphists who worked on the sites and have written papers. So that's how it started. Then it expanded and expanded because you realize that you really can't answer who the Harappans were unless you knew who were the first farmers of India, because the Harappan civilization grew naturally out of the agricultural revolution that happened in northwestern India. Then you realize you can't answer who the first farmers of India were unless you realize who were the first Indians. So the scope of the book kept expanding and expanding so much that by halfway into this book, I really thought that there's no way I'm going to finish this because there's a sea of information to cross, and there's no way of doing that. Then you came across, after I had already done about half of the work across multiple disciplines, then you realize that a lot of new answers are coming about population formation in general across the world from a new discipline called population genetics. And at this point of time, population genetics findings were not yet, were sometimes very contradictory, but they were using DNA of living people, currently living people, to understand how people moved. But they could figure out which population groups were connected to which other population groups based on the DNA of existing living people, but they really could not figure out how those relationships came about. That jump happened about 5 to 6 years ago, when population geneticists acquired the ability to extract ancient DNA, that's DNA from the skeletons, the bones of people who lived thousands or tens of thousands of years ago, and then you could figure out which population groups moved where and when. So, and this happened over the last few years. Hundreds of DNA samples have been recovered from around the world. So this gave much more clarity to how population groups formed, including in South Asia. And since I had already done work across other disciplines, it was much more easy for me to correlate the new findings with findings that were already there.
Yeah. No, this is really interesting. So I'm going to just take you, because this is a really important book. I'm going to start or to sort of try and take you on this journey right from the beginning. Right. So the first big event that we see in this sort of journey of Homo sapiens is something called as out of Africa. Okay, now all of you have heard of what the origins of Homo sapiens is supposed to be Africa. Well, my question to you is, how can we be so sure? I mean, on what basis are we saying this? What does the evidence really show?
The idea that modern humans arose, or Homo sapiens arose in India, in Africa, is not new. I think this is something even Charles Darwin had suggested. But for a long time, people around the world, this was not entirely, there was no consensus on this. People around the world thought that modern humans arose from, evolved from earlier forms of Homo species around the world in multiple places. Now we know that that's not so. Now that understanding is now given up of multiple origins of modern humans. Now it is more, there is no serious scientist anywhere in the world except maybe one or two people in China who still hold on to the idea that humans arose in China. But no serious scientist anywhere today suggests anything other than that modern humans arose in Africa. The latest evidence that we have for this is from the DNA of existing living people, that if you look at them, you would find that all of the non-African population is essentially a subset of the African population genetic diversity. It's a subset of the African population moved out of Africa into the Arabian Peninsula and then spread across the world, starting from around 70,000 years ago. So that we can see even from the DNA of currently living people.
Yeah, I think one of the sentences which I've underlined in the book is virtually everyone in this room. I mean, we're saying virtually all that we know of human population can be traced genetically to a particular African woman, right? I mean, that's how certain we can be today.
That's right. We know that if you look at the mitochondrial DNA, there's mtDNA, which is that small part of our ancestry that comes from, that's derived from mother to daughter to daughter to daughter, and comes without being mixed as much of the rest of our genome is mixed. mtDNA and Y chromosome in the case of father to son to son to son, these two are not mixed, and therefore we can figure out genetic trees because they come with mutations. From this we know that all the mtDNA around the world, they can be traced back to one mtDNA haplogroup called L3 in Africa. And that's from where we know that when that migration might have happened, which is around 70,000 years ago.
Yeah, so 70,000 years is now the sort of cut-off point most people are sort of agreeing to. I should just also add that at this time there were other types of humans also. So Homo sapiens was still not supreme. So today we're saying Homo sapiens is the only, in this whole Homo family, Homo sapiens is the only one. They were the Homo erectus and a variety of others. Yeah. How did they disappear? And did they ever come to India, for example?
We do not know. We do know that there was a very robust and strong population of other Homo species before the modern humans or Homo sapiens arrived here around 65,000 years ago. How do we know that? We know that from the stone tools that they have left behind, especially in central India and in peninsular India. So we know that there is very strong presence of other Homo species. Going back, the earliest of the tools that are left behind by the other Homo species goes back to as far back as 1.5 million years ago. So but we do not yet know what species they belong to. They could be Homo erectus, they could be Homo heidelbergensis, but we have not been able to figure that out because though we do have a lot of stone tools, we do not have much fossils. We only have one fragment of a skull, and from that it has been difficult to figure out which particular species they belong to.
So what is the best evidence that we have now on Homo sapiens, which is all of us, in the Indian subcontinent? I'm going to try and move the discussion more to India now.
Yeah.
Can we say there were Homo sapiens in India 70,000 years, 60,000, 50? What is it?
So if you know that the migration out of Africa happened around 70,000 years ago, which we now know, we do not yet have old enough fossils from India to say when could they have arrived in India. So we have to go by findings of fossils from other regions. We do know that we have stone tools available from Australia that says that modern humans were there at least by 59,000 years ago. We have fossils from Southeast Asia which suggest that modern humans were there at least by 63,000 years ago. And it's highly likely that they went through India to reach those places. Therefore, we arrive at least they had to have been in India at least by 65,000 years ago.
I mean, just to also, just outline this migration process, people are moving from Africa typically through this Eritrea-Yemen belt. So it's, think of the Red Sea, but it's a different climatic system, so that you can actually cross the sea. It's a very different geographical system we're talking about. People are moving through India, they're moving to Southeast Asia, they reach Australia. In fact, one of the remarkable things I read in the book is that it's quite likely that Australia was populated before Europe.
Before, that's right. Because the earliest evidence for modern humans or Homo sapiens in Europe doesn't go much beyond 45,000 years ago, or maximum 50,000. 45 is more accurate. So you don't go far beyond that in Europe. But as we said, in Australia, we do have presence of modern humans by at least 59,000 years.
So when the British actually reached Australia, this was, from a historic time sense view, very ironic, right? Because
that's right.
Human beings had reached Australia far earlier, at least as per the record.
Before they were European modern humans, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's for me, it just unsettled my whole understanding of human history. Coming more again to the subcontinent, you make this difference between the genetic evidence and the archaeological evidence.
Yeah.
What is it? Can you just tell us a bit about what these differences usually are, in terms of the method?
A lot of the process of work, and I would say the distinguishing feature of this book, and because of the way in which because I started working on all the other disciplines before I came to genetics, is that a lot of the effort was in essentially looking at this evidence from multiple disciplines and seeing how they fit together or do not fit together. And the surprising finding has been how well they fit together. Once you understood that all different disciplines speak different languages, they come from different assumptions. So what looks like conflicts may not really be conflicts. What looked like a major conflict, which actually this argument went on for a very long time, was that if you ask archaeologists and say, when can you find the earliest modern humans in India, it's likely that they would say somewhere between, even up to 120,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago. If you ask a geneticist, he would not say anything beyond 65,000 years ago. So what accounts for this difference? Even though it's only a 65,000 year difference, it is a big difference. And what accounts for it? What accounts for it is the fact that when archaeologists say this is when they arrived, what are they depending on? They're depending on tools left behind or fossils left behind by modern humans to say that they were here by then. But when geneticists talk about who were the earliest modern humans there, they're looking at the traces of their ancestry left behind in modern humans today. So essentially they are asking the question, when did our ancestors of its currently living population, when did our ancestors come here first? Archaeologists are answering the question, when did the first modern humans arrive here? These two may not be the same, Because let's say there is a population of modern humans who arrived in India, and let's say they all got wiped out. The first batch of modern humans who arrived here around 120,000 years ago, let's say they all got wiped out because of some natural disaster. And that it is a population that arrived around 65,000 years ago that led on to the population of modern humans that is there today. So then in which case the conclusions of the two disciplines may differ, but they are not actually conflicting evidence.
Yeah. Now that's important. So you can have some people moving into the subcontinent perishing, but what matters from the geneticist point of view is the people who survived, and we have some evidence till date. So you have this word in the book called the first Indians.
Yeah.
Right? And in a way, all of us have some genetic connection, a huge part, in fact, is what you would call as first Indians, right?
Yes.
I'm curious. I mean, we in India we grew up with this idea of we'll come to this in a bit. There's Dravidian, Aryan, and all those things. But how is it that this first Indians, they seem to have gone all over the subcontinent? If I'm getting it right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is absolutely new finding. We did not know this. Even very recently, even now many people would ask, where do we have to go to find the first modern humans who were there? Do we have to go to Andaman Islands? Where else do we have to go? But the answer today, we know very clearly, is that you have to look in the mirror or look around. Because almost all population groups in the subcontinent, and India is meant in the old sense of the term, which includes all of South Asia, almost all population groups have 50 to 65% of their ancestry coming from the people who were here 65,000 years ago, the first Indians. And why it is so widespread? Remember that Indian population, like all other populations around the world, are the result of multiple mass migrations, especially in prehistory. India is no exception, and every population group is like that. But it's important to remember that the next major migrations happened. The first Indians were there in India from around 65,000 years ago, and the next major migration that affected the Indian demography, that we're talking about probably around 12,000 to 13,000 years ago. They had a very, very long time to spread and to dominate the entire region, and their ancestry is still substantially prevalent. And this is surprising because in many parts of the world, subsequent migrations have significantly wiped out the earlier first European or first whatever region ancestry. In Europe, for example, the ancestry of the first Europeans who were there around 45,000 years ago is now down to single digits in most parts of Europe, except in Northern Europe where it is higher.
So now let's fast forward a bit to this, 10,000 years or the history, and before the Harappa, stage where you have this chapter called the first farmers.
Yeah.
How does this happen, and how big is that when you look at human history as an event, and where does it happen in the subcontinent?
I would take this a little long too, because I think it is important to understand this in the global context. Very often, much of the discussions around Indian population formation gets distorted by the understanding that we are talking about Indian population, what we are talking about Indian population is something peculiar or special. It is not. So therefore it is important for us to understand that today, significantly because of the ancient DNA understanding, which gels with earlier evidence from other disciplines, we now know almost how every large population group in the world has been formed, and what were the migrations that led to it. Now you might ask, how can we know? Because there are migrations that happen all the time, right? Into all places, all times, all regions, across time. So how can we put a structured way of understanding this? The answer is that there is a structured way of understanding this, because now if we look back, we can see that most large human population groups were formed as a result of four classes of migrations, each of which were driven by a global force, by which I mean that when we look back, we can see why those migrations happened when they did, and they had the impact they had. The first is, of course, the out of Africa migrations we talked about, which happened between 70,000 years ago. The last continent that they arrived in were the Americas, and that is 16,000 years ago. So between 70,000 years ago and 16,000 years ago, the out of Africa migrants, went to occupy all of the habitable world. And but the important thing is that and this was driven by climatic factors, same as for every other mammal. Now, as they were spreading out, there's a major thing that happened. There's a glacial age intervened between around 29,000 years ago and about 12 or 13,000 years ago. And when glacial ages happen, it means that large parts of the sea they become ice, there's not enough evaporation, which means there's little rain. Large parts of the world become uninhabitable, dry, arid. Lush forests become deserts. So during this period, these modern human population groups were spreading, these are hunter-gatherers, they got separated from each other for a very long time. We're talking about thousands of years, which meant that minor genetic differences accumulated. And but it is important for us to bear in mind that 99.9% of the DNA of all modern human populations today is still the same. So when you say genetic differences, they are really minor in the larger scheme of things. And then the next major thing happens when the glacial age ends around 12,000 years ago. And what happens then is that we see many of these hunter-gatherer modern human population groups experimenting with agriculture in many parts of the world. The earliest experiments may have started in Southeast Asia with people trying to cultivate banana, tubers, yams. But they're not very productive. Those modern human population groups, which were in places, geographical areas where they had the opportunity to domesticate cereals, rice, wheat, barley, they found themselves to be very lucky, because when you cultivate these cereals, the productivity is very high, and you can actually change your lifestyle from hunter-gatherer to being a farmer. And that's what happened in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in India, and in China. These are the four large, all of these areas.
Yeah, and the place it happens, at least now we know from the record, is a place called Mehrgarh.
In India, yeah.
Which is in Balochistan now, the Indian subcontinent. And this is a very important site because we say this is one of the first places where farming really established, and at least was the base on which later the Harappan civilization sort of...
That's right. In the Indian subcontinent, the earliest evidence of agriculture is from Mehrgarh, today in Balochistan province of Pakistan.
So the question now, so who are the Harappans? This has been a sort of million-dollar question in Indian history, and let me just set the context out here. What Tony is giving us is the latest evidence from genetics, which is a 5-year-old field. But these are debates which have been happening now for more than 200 years, from linguistics, archaeology, and a variety of other disciplines. And one of the big debates was, there's this Harappan civilization which happens roughly this 3,000 different phases, but 3,000 BC, 2,000 BC. And then we have in India something, the classic texts like the Rig Veda, right? And we have something called as the Vedic period. Again, no clear date relating to that. And this is a very big hot potato issue, because if you want to claim that one is the source of human beings is India itself, or the source of Vedic culture is a very Indian thing, then you don't, in that ideological project, you don't want it to be coming from outside. And so this is a big ideological issue, and that is why who the Harappans are is a very, very big question. So how do you address this? Is there an answer to this?
Yeah, there is. I think we did not know the answer. And in fact, that is one of the things that started me on this, who were the Harappans. Now we have a very clear answer. Now, to us, so the agriculture started happening across the board. And it is this agriculture, when agriculture starts happening, what happens immediately is a population explosion, because agricultural populations grow nothing like hunter-gatherer population, which grow very slowly. And when this population explosion happens as a result of the global force, which is man figuring out how to do agriculture, what happens are migrations. So let me finish this and then I'll come back to your question. So this is the second class of migrations, agriculture-related migrations, that shaped large parts of the world. Third class of migration, which is, again, I'll connect it to your question. Third class of migrations happened when one set of modern humans in Central Asia figured out how to ride a horse and combined that with existing mastery over metallurgy. And what that led to, where that you should remember when a population group gets mastery over the horse, the kind of mobility they acquire now is nothing comparable to anything that went earlier. So what the result of this was that this population group moving across from Central Asia into Europe and into areas that are already populated by farmers and significantly changing the demography of Europe, Central Asia, West Asia, South Asia, all the way up to China. So this is the third class of migration that happened over more than 1,000 to 2,000 years that changed the demography of a large part of Eurasia. And the fourth class of migrations is that shaped global populations is something that we or our parents or our grandparents have felt the effects of, which are colonial migrations, which happened again because of a global factor, which is one modern or a few modern human population groups figuring out how to travel larger distances over the seas, inventing steamships and moving into areas already populated and changing their demography in the Americas, in Australia. The fourth class did not affect Indian demography, though it may have left a mark on our culture. It affected, did not leave much mark on Indian demography because the number of migrants who came as a result of colonial migration was too few compared to the existing population. So now, as far as therefore the Indian population formation is the result of other three classes of migration. The first we talked about, out of Africa migrations. The second, the agriculture-related migration. And who were the people who created the agricultural revolution and out of which the Harappan civilization grew. Now we know that this was a population, this was a mixed population of first Indians and another population that related to the West Asian farmers, especially the Zagros region of Iran. So this is a mixed population of first Indians who are already here and West Asians related to the agriculturists of Iran who created the agricultural revolution in Mehergarh and the northwestern part of India. And the Mehergarh evidence goes back to 9,000 years ago. And that slowly, over many thousands of years, developed into the Harappan civilization. So now we know the answer to the question, who were the Harappans? The Harappans were a mixture of first Indians and West Asians. And when their civilization declined around 1900 BCE because of a long drought, they spread across all of India, North India and South India, spreading their culture, many of the practices that had been perfected in the Harappan civilization. Therefore, we can say the Harappan civilization, the Harappans are the ancestors of both North Indians and South Indians, and the Harappan civilization in many ways is you could see it as a glue that holds our culture today and our civilization together.
Yeah, and that's an important observation because there have been these also ideas that South India is very distinct from North India, right? And I think what this research is saying is that no, actually there's a lot of mixture which happens in this period.
There is a nuance there. So to get that nuance, we have to now get into the next migration. So the out of Africa migrants are in the West Asia related migration which led to the agricultural revolution, the Harappan civilization. There's a third migration that happened from East Asia, which is a result of China taking to agriculture and causing a huge population expansion and waves of migration coming along all the way through East Asia and finally reaching India. And they brought Austroasiatic languages. These are Khasi and Mundari spoken by tribals in central India and eastern India, which are related to the Mon Khmer family of languages, which are spoken in Laos, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian countries. So this is also an agriculture-related migration, so one from the west and one from the east. And the fourth and last major migration to make a mark on Indian demography came from the same population that we earlier spoke about, which mastered the art of riding a horse and combined that with metallurgy and who were in Central Asia. They moved down from regions today known as Kazakhstan to South Asia and to India. Now we know from genetic evidence between 4,000 to 3,500 years ago. So that's the last major migration that they spoke an Indo-European language, called themselves Arya, and that's the last migration that happened after when the Harappan civilization had already on its decline because of the climatic challenges. So now you have a very interesting time. In fact, if anybody asked, what's the most tumultuous period in the entire history of India, there is a simple answer, and there's nothing that can compare to it. It is a period between around 4,000 years ago and beginning of Common Era, or 2000 BCE to beginning of Common Era. Why is that? Because think of all that happened. The Harappan civilization, the largest of its time, as big as the Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations put together, and which survived in its mature form alone for 700 years, fell apart because of a long drought. And that population moved both to east towards North India and south towards South India. At the same time comes another migration from East India, bringing new languages, and two new migrants from eastern parts of India. And it doesn't stop there. There is yet another migration that comes around the same time from Central Asia, bringing new languages, and is dominant in the northern part of India, and shifts. There's a language shift that happens in northern India from pre-Aryan and likely Proto-Dravidian languages to Indo-European or Indo-Aryan languages. Now, the language of the Harappa, however, continues to thrive and develop further into the Dravidian languages of southern India. So the answer to the question of there is significant similarity in genetically, because the Harappans are common genetic ancestry and to an extent cultural ancestry as well, even though the linguistic ancestry of the Harappans today lies with South India. So when you say Dravidian and Aryan, what has to be kept in mind, and this is often lost sight of, is that they are not racial categories. It's like even when the Central Asian people were moving down towards South Asia, they would have been mixing on the way. So it's not realistic to look at these as racial terms. These are language communities. Arya are those who speak Indo-European languages, who call themselves Arya, and similarly. To come to your, this is the mixing that happened during this period. This period of between 2000 BC and the beginning of the Common Era. Genetics say there was mixing of the kind that was never seen earlier or later. And that's what we say, that's why we say that if you take anybody from no matter how remote a region, and if you take his DNA and test today, you will find it's some combination of these four groups. The out of Africa migrants, West Asians, East Asians, Central Asians, but in different proportions. East Asians will have more of East Asian ancestry, South Indians will have more of West Indian ancestry, North Indians and Western Indians will have more of West Asian or Central Asian ancestry, but these are the four components.
I mean, in the book you have a very nice analogy of a pizza. Okay, so I wanted you to explain to this audience in very simple terms of what this pizza looks like.
If you take an ancestry of an individual person, of an average person, what would it be? As we said earlier, 50 to 65% of the ancestry of most human population groups in India today comes from the first Indians.
Yeah. So let me just break it
down. That's the base.
So this is the base. Okay, so the base of all of us in this room. I mean, this is the amazing part about learning about this new research, is to discover a shared ancestry among all of us, right? So the common base is what we calling the first Indians, right? Which is literally 30, 40, 50,000 years ago, and that's about 50 to 60% of the genetic content out here.
That's right.
Is that one particular way.
That's right. Which again, on top of that comes the source, which is the Harappans, because that spread all over. Yeah. So this also what unites us together in many ways.
Yeah. So the Harappan source is the next layer. So there's the base, and there's now this Harappan layer, because these guys have been moving out. And again, I'm not, we are not using it casually. This is now, good genetic science to prove a migration. You can't just say, that's because something went, you need to have a causal mechanism to say that something moved from point A to point B, and that's what genetical science is now establishing. So first Indian as a base, then the Harappan sauce.
And of course the cheese, the idea. And of course the toppings, including the East Asian migrants, and of course all the other migrations that we have read about in history, which haven't left very much of a mark on our demography, but they're there, whether it is the Arabs, the Persians, the Huns, the Sakas.
So different sort of all toppings.
Which did not leave, as I said, some of those migrations may have left a mark on our culture, but they did not leave a significant enough mark on our demography, but you could say this is all makes up.
And you mentioned the topics. Like if you say the Arya is the cheese, so to speak. It's what I think what the genetic science is saying is that it is more sort of, it was sprinkled much more in northern India
Absolutely.
than in southern
It's
India.
not. It's not sprinkled equally.
Yeah. So
But yeah.
So just to again reconvey. So you have this first Indians, then the Harappan sauce, and then the Aryan wave, which is kind of on one part of India, and the others.
I mean, spread all over,
Yeah,
but you can
spread
say
over.
that it's not exactly in the same proportions.
Yeah, but today virtually all of us are a mixture of
That's right.
all these this things. And what's interesting is the source, is this Central Asia steppe region, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is this has been the source also for the European population,
Correct.
and India. I mean, the class of Indo-European languages, stretches
That's right.
out very, very far. Last question which I'm going to ask you is on this question of caste.
Yeah.
Big question: when does the caste system in India start? And believe it or not, there's now a genetic answer to this.
Yes.
Coming from the genetic science. What is that about?
Yeah, we do have a fairly clear answer to, and that is that as we said, genetics says that there was significant mixing that happened between all four components between 2000 BC, which is when they arrived, until the beginning of the Common Era, or to be more specific, 100 CE. So what happened at 100 CE? 100 CE, beginning around 100 CE, genetic science says, the mixing stopped, and most population groups took to endogamy, which is the practice of marrying within your own community, and that has continued till now. So, since endogamy or marrying within your own community is the distinguishing feature of the caste system, we now have an approximate date for the beginning of the caste system, which is around the beginning of the Common Era, which contradicts many common beliefs earlier, because earlier it was believed that it's the arrival of the Arya that began the caste system. Now we know that's not true, because the arrival of the Central Asian migrants who call themselves Arya happened around almost 2000 years earlier, 2000 BCE. You are saying the endogamy begins around 100 CE, so it's 2000 years of mixing. So you have to study the caste system as a political development that happened around the beginning of the Common Era, and not as the result of a migration, not a divine order, or backed by genetic reasoning, because by the time this happened, a large amount of mixing had already taken place.
I think that's a fascinating point. I mean, we're saying the Aryan migration happening roughly, we're saying
4,000 to 3,500 years ago.
Yeah, so we're saying 2000 BCE, 2000 BCE, and then the caste system in terms of pure endogamy, which leaves its mark in genetics, starts 100 CE. So we are saying, so one takeaway is, somebody, you leave the room and somebody asks you, when did the caste system start?
Yeah.
We can say at least 1900 years ago.
That's right.
Right. So that's something which now we can say with the help of genetic.
I wish we could also say this is why it happened, but that needs more research. That needs significant more research, and this is why it happened.
But that's true. But I think this is also going to shake up a lot of things. For example, the Arthashastra.
Yeah.
The Arthashastra, there's still huge contestation on when it was written. But in the Arthashastra, you have clear gradation on caste. But if you actually take it very literally as a Chandragupta Maurya kind of a treatise, then that's 300 BCE, right? And so there's a sort of a
there is a significant difference among experts over what exactly is the period of the Arthashastra.
Exactly.
Was it during the Chandragupta Maurya, or is it much later during the Gupta Empire?
My hunch is a lot of the revision will happen now, taking into account
Exactly.
these findings as well. All right, some questions from the audience. Please keep it very short. We'll start from the lady here, and then.
One is like you have shattered one of the isms, like maybe racism as well as casteism. But from a female point of view, now can I say that it's no longer Ghar Ka Chirag, it's the daughter who is the Ghar Ka Chirag. And the other part is like how did all this research and whatever you have gathered from while you wrote the book, how has it changed you as a person?
Completely surprised me the fact that the caste system began much later than the arrival, which is surprising. the fact that the Harappans are genetic ancestors of both North Indians and South Indians, which is surprising. So there are a large number of findings which are completely surprising. But it was hugely satisfying, because now you have coherent answers for a number of sequential questions, which until now we didn't have. We had some questions, some answers which would conflict with something else. But now what we have is a coherent set of answers for almost all the critical questions of Indian history. So far we have been reading Indian history without the basics in place. Because without knowing how did the population form, how can we answer anything else? And we did not have insight into that. We have been reading history without the basics. Now that we have the basics, the rest of it becomes much more clearer, and it also leaves us with a lot more clarity on where should new research efforts lie. I think one of the most important research efforts that should lie today is around what happened around the beginning of the Common Era. What was the political development that led to endogamy being practiced across a large part of the world, which was until then significantly used to mixing. It's a significant question. So I think like that. So it's satisfying because now you have a coherent set of answers for a number of related and sequential questions.
Yeah. So Shia, one more point on gender. Is there something which throws light on gender from genetic science? Can we say
yes,
societies have always been patriarchal? Can we make some grandstanding claims?
There are some things that are interesting, which is that mtDNA, which we discussed earlier, is if you look only mtDNA and Y chromosome, which is Y chromosome from the father, you should realize that they both of them form only a small part of our DNA. The rest of our DNA we inherit from our parents in a mixed form. We talk about mtDNA and Y-DNA because they are a small part of our DNA, but they come without being mixed, and therefore we can make family trees. Now, if you go through the mtDNA alone, you would find that 70 to 90% of the mtDNA comes from the first Indians. 70 to 90%. But if you go through the Y chromosome and say where do they come from, it will come somewhere around 30 to 35%. So a significant difference between where your ancestry lie if you go through the mtDNA route or the Y chromosome route, which means there was significant replacement of the male genome by subsequent migrations at different levels of migrations that happened, while the female ancestry did not get wiped out anywhere near. But still, important thing to remember, as I said, is that despite all of these things, it is the first Indian ancestry in India is still 50 to 65%, a very large number.
We'll take the second question.
Sir, 3 to 4,000 years ago, Saraswati River civilization was there. So, is there any connection between Harappa civilization and Saraswati civilization? And what we feel here, that the Vedic development or cultural development of India is related with Saraswati civilization or Harappan civilization?
Two things. I think there is only one civilization that is archaeologically available, and that is between 2600 BCE and 1900 BCE in its mature phase, which covers all of northwestern India. They all carry lots of similarities. And that civilization, internationally, globally, is known as the Indus Valley civilization. I have used the phrase Harappan civilization because I think Indus Valley is misleading because it goes far beyond Indus Valley. But it's the same civilization. Now, those who are calling it Saraswati civilization are trying to suggest that the Harappan civilization is Vedic because Saraswati is mentioned in the Vedas. But as we have seen, the Indo-European or Indo-Aryan migrations took place later, after the Harappan civilization went into decline. So the Harappan civilization is a pre-Aryan civilization, and one of the most. We don't really realize how unique and how large an impact the Harappan civilization has made on our country. But that's a different but that's a different story. So, but yeah, to the answer to your question is that there are no two civilizations. There's only one civilization. There's an attempt to change the narrative by giving it this name or that name, but the civilization there is only one, and that lasted in its mature from 2600 BCE to 1900 BCE.
I think what he's also saying is there is, of course, the reference to the river, and this is a classic. Yeah, no, there's a. I think the evidence is very conflicted on the dating of when exactly this has happened. So this is a classic. This is where the famous lines come back to haunt us. Ab chronology samajhe. So this is where the history really sort of seems to matter. Maybe one last question. Sorry.
Xenophobic tendencies are, getting prominent. Like Indians don't want Rohingya, Americans don't want Mexicans, Britain is doing Brexit. Did early Indians were xenophobic as well? Like did not want the migrants, to, and I think migrants do help in developing. So, what did your research tell you? Did they were xenophobic or not, or how did they treat outsiders?
I think hunter-gatherers are mobile. So I don't think, for example, to use the framework that I had used, let's say when the agricultural migrations begin, I think I don't think there would be as much conflict as the hunter-gatherers would move away into some other new place. In any case, what hunter-gatherers think are ideal places for them are not necessarily the ideal places for the farmers. So I don't think that class of migrations led to huge conflicts. But I do think the migration of those who are mobile because they have figured how to ride the horse and combine that with methodology, that would have led to, because they were also then moving into areas that were already settled. And farmers, unlike hunter-gatherers, have no option of moving away. They're tied to their land. They're sitting ducks in many ways. So you can see in the European archaeology, for example, huge evidence of conflict and also population displacement. So I think that class of migration probably led to real conflicts. And the last class of migration is colonial. We know all about it, so we don't have to do guesswork. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah.
There is a fifth migration from Kerala, which is him moving to Delhi. Yeah. I think we have run out of time, but you can speak to the privilege to go to Harvard and actually see a lab run by David Reich. They do these, they take these sort of blood samples. I mean, now even from ancient fossils and so on, DNA testing. It's completely changing the way we know our own histories. And the remarkable thing is, in a way, it kind of shows this shared ancestry that we all have. So I would highly recommend all of you to, read this book. Tony, it's been wonderful having you out here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for this very informative session. And my take from this session is like we are actually now, we can shout it loud that we all are migrants. So I would like, on behalf of VLF, to gift you a token of appreciation for sparing us your valuable time. The gift painted by Ms. Manasvi Kedar especially for our author, Mr. Choni Joseph. Thank you so much. The next up author here today is Mr. Arun Maira.